Shalom Akim, Shalom, giving all honor, all praise, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone for teaching us his truth. Salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to go through just a little bit I've just been doing some reading within, Wisdom of Solomon. And then, so the title I have for this lesson is, give your strength unto this woman, right? And, it's kind of basically like a play on words, from Proverbs, because the scriptures, talk about, to give your strength unto woman. But I kind of thought it was just very interesting. We what we really do is give our strength unto this woman here, when it comes to wisdom, right? And the scriptures talk about how wisdom is the principal thing, and with all that get understanding, right? And that's one of the things our people strongly lack, because they get into certain situations because essentially they're basically trying to navigate a world or navigate their life without essentially a guide, without, like, imagine when you when you see tourists, for example, one of the things tourists, when they go on to these different excursions, they always have a guide to show them where to go, where to stay away from, these are spots that are dangerous, don't do this, don't go there, this is an historical, landmark, so on and so forth. So the guide is also giving you essentially it gives you insight in regards to certain things that when you go to a certain place, and they're basically giving you like an explanation also of what actually happened, what took place here, right? And that is the benefits of having wisdom, because our people don't have very good templates to actually refer back to when it comes to the different situations that they get themselves into, right? They're trying to navigate their so-called excursion without a guide, right? And it's not like the Lord is not compassionate to send prophets to be able to guide our people, right? That's not the case at all. As a matter of fact, I guess I'll start off with that one, then I'll go to Wisdom of Solomon, and I sincerely pray that this lesson is edifying, right? This is let's bear with me. Let me just open this, right? This is Second Chronicles chapter 36 verse 15. And it says, and the Lord Yahweh of their fathers sent unto them by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place, right? So the Lord uses his prophets as a mouthpiece to be able to actually properly guide our people back to your Heavenly Father through his Son, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, right? Because they're essentially they're destitute, and warning you of things to actually come upon the planet Earth, right? So that is a sign of really the Lord's mercy and compassion, right? And the scriptures talk about how wisdom, she uttereth her voice in the streets, and she crieth in the chief place of concourse, right? Because as a people, we're very, very simple, right? So it's supposed to essentially give you a higher level of understanding, right? To essentially subdue your own understanding, as it says in Ezra's, right? Because the things of this world have not profit you anything, right? Black History Month is not something that profits you, so-called these different businesses and different endeavors, financial so-called freedom, so-called, I say that so-called, it doesn't actually profit our people towards any sort of it basically is just a pseudo salvation, right? So this is verse 16, and it says, but they mocked the messengers of the Most High, and despised his words and misused his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, until there was no remedy, right? So this is essentially a time where, the prophets are telling our people, through our apostles and elders on down, to come back to the Heavenly Father, right? To remember, seek the Lord while he may be found, right? To seek righteousness, seek meekness, so you can be hidden in the days of the Lord's wrath, right? So because you see all these things come into pass, these different events occurring between, the US and Venezuela, the US and their allies, for a time, because we know the prophecy, right? You see all these things come into pass, and people don't see it as essentially as an opportunity, to essentially, seek refuge, right? Um, as a matter of fact, before I go there, I just want to get this precept in Jeremiah, then I'll read Wisdom of Solomon. This is Jeremiah 8:7, and it says, Yea, the stork in the heaven knoweth her appointed times, and the turtle and the crane and the swallow observe the time of their coming, but my people do know not the judgment of the Lord, right? So all these things, all these so-called like bad things, I say it like that, evil things happening upon the planet Earth, the Lord is controlling and has a hand in these things, right? Remember, he's a balanced power, right? So, these things come into pass. Like, imagine the different animals, they make certain preparations, essentially when, for example, like winter is about to come, right? So, for example, you have like, I'll just use bears as an example. So bears, they go through this process known as hyperphagia, right? So hyper meaning like above, phagia meaning, I believe it will go back to the word eating, right? So they go through a process of, eating essentially excessively, right? So, when I'm saying that, equate what I'm saying, spiritually as well, right? They make essentially certain preparations because they have a certain type of foresight to know, what's, going to happen, right? So the same thing, is, we carry a certain level of urgency, right, in seeking the Lord and seeking and repenting, coming back, right? So, and seeking wisdom, right? So, I wanted to read a little bit of this here in Wisdom of Solomon, and just just to kind of kind of hit the nail on the head when it comes to the importance of wisdom, because when going back to the point I made earlier in regards to wisdom crieth within, and she uttereth a voice in the streets, how people they don't see wisdom as something valuable. And on top of that, our people are very carnal too, because when they see the men of the Lord, they see prophets dressed in essentially sackcloth, in a sentiment of mourning. They use it as an opportunity to scoff. They use it as an opportunity to say whatever, right? They don't see it as an opportunity to actually get close to the Lord. They don't see it as something valuable. The only thing they think essentially, what's that precept in Timothy where it says, they think godliness they think gain is godliness. Let me say it like that, right? But godliness with contentment is great gain, like it says. But that's what they think, right? Because that's what the Catholic Church has strongly given and shown our people, and they think that is essentially a sentiment of prosperity. When you go through the accounts of forefathers, they had moments where they were doing good, and they had moments where they had they went through a lot of suffering, right? Especially I'm speaking about like righteous examples, right? So this is Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 8. And I'll just read down. And it says here, Wisdom reacheth from one end to another mightily, and sweetly doth she order all things. I loved her and sought her from my youth. I desired to make her my spouse, and I was a lover of her beauty. And in she in that she is conversant with the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. She magnifieth her nobility, right? Because that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to give us, these through these laws, statutes, and commandments. It's supposed to give us a sentiment of nobility and uprightness. And, Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents, right? And the Lord created us to be essentially a noble vine, right? So nobility has not just a responsibility, but nobility has, they don't behave like peasants, right? These other nations are peasants. They're actually, they're not even peasants. They're less than nothing, right? So, that's the importance of wisdom, right? And when it says in Deuteronomy, for example, keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom in the sight of the other nations, right? So the other nations are essentially supposed to look at you Israelites, as a people where they can look to you, on how to actually, be, an example, right? But what do we see here? They don't see you as that in your noble stature. They see you as that proverb, that byword, because a lot of our people behave themselves, as degenerates, like it says in Jeremiah, right? So, continuing on, it says, she magnifieth her nobility. Yea, the Lord of all things himself loved her. And it says, for she is privy to the mysteries of the knowledge of the Most High, and a lover of his works, right? And, that's one of the things, the Lord said he would come and he would sup, right? So essentially, giving, information, insight, intimate secrets, what I'm saying? Because that's the benefits of, actually having wisdom, right? And wisdom was one of the things, when you think about it, in different cases and different situations, our forefathers were glorified, actually exemplifying wisdom in their particular situations, right? So, and our people they don't see that as something that is beneficial, right? So, let me see if I can grab an example, of that. One second. Let's go to Genesis. This is Genesis chapter 41, verse 38. And it says, and the Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man of whom the Spirit of the Most High is? And the Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as the Most High showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, according to all thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And the Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And the Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen. Those linens is a top quality fabric, right? It's actually made from a plant called flax, right? It's a very natural fiber. It's not, and it's very expensive. It's not something that you would commonly see today, because a lot of our clothes is essentially made in blends. So a primary amount of our clothes are made from like polyester, which is very carcinogenic and is normally mixed with cotton, but sometimes the ratio is probably like a 60-40%, right? So, a lot of, and this is really just going back to, having, wisdom as well, because when you understand these things, you realize that, this society is really, it's really a base society, living under a base ruler, because a lot of the things that we wear and we use in our daily lives, it really, there's really no wisdom attached to it. And the scriptures say that the knowledge of wickedness is not wisdom, right? Because there's no fear, right? The laws, statutes, and commandments actually give you an insight of the Heavenly Father's mindset, right? And actually how to properly govern the whole earth as a whole, right? So I'm just reading, that was just a little side tangent there, but uh, I just finished this real quick, just to show you the importance, of having that wisdom that it glorifies you in a lot of these different, positions, right? Whether it might be, and it can just be something as, I don't want to say insignificant. It can be something as like, in your plantation situation, right? Because you're going back to, you're inquiring the ways of your forefathers, right? And seeking out the wisdom of the ancient, right? So here, it says, and continuing on, verse 42, and it says, and put a gold chain about his neck, and made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, bowed the knee, and made him ruler over the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. Right? So, when go back in the story, like, Joseph was made an overseer over the Pharaoh's house. Eventually he gets falsely accused, so he goes through some suffering for a moment of time, ends up in prison. And, Pharaoh, one day he's got this dream. He has this dream, and there's no one there to actually provide a proper interpretation of that particular dream, right? So, the spirit that was on Joseph, gave him, he was given the understanding to actually give understanding upon the particular dream, right? And to actually provide a proper action plan on what to do, right? So what did happen? As the scriptures, as a matter of fact, let me get this. The scriptures say that wisdom, maketh a man's face to shine. So this is the woman that, we give our strength to, right? Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 1, and it says, who is as the wise man, and who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed. Right? So his vesture, his clothing, manifested, but it only manifested because it showed what was actually, he was spiritually decked out on the inside, right? So, just to show the importance, of that wisdom, right? So here it says, if mysteries, Wisdom of Solomon 8 and 5, if mysteries be a possession to be desired in this life, what is richer than wisdom, and worketh all things? And that's one of the things our people don't see the value in, because they see the value in actually carnal riches. But even if they were spiritual, they can actually use the carnal riches to acquire spiritual riches, if you understood the ways, because when you see the way the society is going, if you're put in situations, you might actually be put in situations to be able to help one another, exemplify certain, things, right? Exemplify certain characteristics, certain fruits of the spirit, right? To be able to help out one another, right? So, the scriptures say that a spiritual man judgeth all things, right? So here, it says, verse 6, if prudence work, who of all that is a more cunning workman than she? If a man love righteousness, her labors and virtue are virtues. For she teacheth temperance and prudence and justice and fortitude. Such are things as she can have nothing more profitable in their life, right? So these are things that it really teaches you to be even more profitable and more well-rounded, so it gives you insight in regards to the mind of the Heavenly Father through His Son. It gives you insight to the different, what's the word I'm looking for, basically the different examples of how they applied wisdom in their different situations, or even when they applied their wisdom in captivity, right? Something as simple as Yahweh Shai saying, I don't even want to say it's simple, but be there for wise as serpents and harmless as doves. That's gold. That's important, because knowing our people and knowing what's coming to pass, with the whole situation in Minnesota, a lot of our people, they think the best avenue to do is to essentially take up arms or something and get into that carnal beast mode like mindset, as opposed to, being subject to authority. That's something that can actually, that's the also importance, I should say, of wisdom, because it teaches you, it's essentially, it's preserving you, knowing this understanding as well. And that's one of the things we want. We want to be preserved from this destruction, right? So continuing on here, it says in verse 8, if a man desire much experience, she knoweth things of old, and conjureth aright what is to come. She knoweth subtleties of speeches, and can expound dark sentences. She foreseeth signs and wonders, and events in season and times. Therefore, I proposed to take her to live with me, knowing that she would be a counselor of good things and a comfort in cares and grief. And that's another thing too. It comforts you, even in the moments of grief, because you have an understanding of how to suffer righteously, right? As opposed to, a lot of our people, they may suffer, but they don't actually understand why, right? So, so that's the comfort. Yahweh Shai said, then I will send you a comforter, right? And it says here, verse 10, for her sake I shall have estimation among the multitude, and honor with the elders, though I be young, right? So essentially, we're being trained up as children in the way that we should go, right? Like it says in Proverbs, so, it's essentially a relearning process of how to actually be, because in the world we were essentially malfunctioning, right? We didn't know how to conduct ourselves, as Israelites and as men, and as, for sisters that are listening, as women as well, right? To actually, go into the accounts of our forefathers and extract and pull out certain, uh, um, I don't want to say beliefs, but basically pull out certain nuggets to actually apply it for ourselves, right? So, I guess I'll stop right here. But I kind of wanted to read this, because I thought it was very interesting, to show the importance, of wisdom, right? As a matter of fact, let me go to verse. This is chapter 6, verse 13, and it says, and she prevented them that desire her, and making herself first known unto them, and who seeketh her early shall have no great travail, for he shall be sitting at his doors, right? So that's one of the things, we hope to be preserved, essentially from this wrath that's coming upon, upon the planet, upon, these different countries, right? So anyways, I sincerely, pray and hope that this lesson was edifying. It's just to kind of give an understanding, and then showing you the benefits of having wisdom, right? So Lord's will, you got something out of this. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Until next time, I say Shalom.